My beloved child. Your soulmate has been carrying the weight of last night in silence, and now they are desperate to tell you what happened before you hear it another way. It began with something they never expected, a conversation that was supposed to last only a few minutes. Someone mentioned you. At first, your soulmate stayed quiet, listening carefully, but then one sentence changed the entire mood. Your name suddenly became connected to something they had been wondering about for a long time. They asked a question, received an answer, and froze. Not because the answer was terrible, but because it confirmed a feeling they had been trying to ignore. From that moment, they couldn't focus on anything else. They replayed old conversations with you, remembered small details they once dismissed, and realized those details meant far more than they understood at the time. Don't skip, because what happened next is the reason they are struggling to keep this inside today. Later that night, your soulmate found themselves alone with a decision they had avoided for far too long. They could continue pretending their feelings were manageable, or finally admit that you had become someone they could no longer treat like an ordinary chapter in their life. They reached for their phone more than once. Your name was right there. They almost contacted you, stopped, tried again, and stopped again. Something was holding them back, not a lack of feeling, but the fear that once they told you everything, there would be no returning to the comfortable silence between you. Then another unexpected detail surfaced. Something they had misunderstood about you was finally explained, and suddenly a situation that once looked like rejection began to look completely different. Your soulmate realized they may have judged one important moment between you incorrectly, and that realization hit harder than they expected. Stay till the end, because this wasn't the biggest thing they discovered last night. Before the night was over, your soulmate made a private decision. They decided that silence could no longer protect either of you. They need you to understand why they pulled back, why certain words were left unsaid, and why their behavior may have seemed confusing. But there is one detail they are still terrified to reveal. It involves the exact moment they realized their feelings for you had crossed a line they could no longer deny. They remember where they were. They remember what was said. Most importantly, they remember what they almost did immediately afterward. Today, that unfinished moment is still following them, and every hour they remain silent makes the truth feel heavier. Something huge is waiting for you, because when your soulmate finally explains what happened last night, you may discover that the real mystery isn't why they stayed quiet, it is what they were preparing to tell you just before everything suddenly changed. What changed so suddenly was not their heart, it was the information that reached them at the exact moment they were preparing to contact you. Your soulmate had already decided they were tired of hiding behind hesitation. They had even formed the first sentence they wanted to say to you, something simple but deeply honest. Then a message arrived. At first, it looked unimportant, but one detail inside it immediately caught their attention because it connected directly to you. They read it twice. Then a third time. Suddenly, memories they had been questioning began fitting together in a completely different way. Your soulmate realized there may have been a reason behind your distance, your silence, or that one moment when you seemed harder to understand. And instead of making them pull away, this realization made them want answers even more. Don't skip, because this was when last night's confusion turned into something deeply personal. Your soulmate began looking back at everything between you with new eyes. They remembered the moments when you seemed ready to say something but changed the subject. They remembered small changes in your tone and the times when your silence seemed to carry more meaning than your words. For the first time, they wondered if both of you had been protecting yourselves from the same thing. That possibility shook them. What if they had mistaken caution for rejection? What if you had been waiting for reassurance while they were waiting for a sign from you? Suddenly, all those missed opportunities felt different. Your soulmate wanted to reach out immediately, but they knew this conversation couldn't be rushed. There was something they needed to admit first, something about their own behavior that they had never explained to you. And once they admitted it, they knew you might finally understand why they kept coming close and then unexpectedly pulling away. But before last night ended, they made another discovery that changed their plan completely. They realized the conversation they wanted to have with you wasn't simply about feelings anymore. It was about a choice they had already made concerning the future of this connection. Stay till the end, because they are no longer wondering whether you matter to them. That question was answered last night. Now they are wondering whether they still have enough time to tell you what they should have said much earlier. They don't want another misunderstanding to decide what happens between you. They don't want fear speaking for them anymore. And most of all, they don't want you walking away without knowing what was happening behind their silence. Because the sentence they almost sent you last night wasn't an ordinary confession. And the real reason they deleted it before pressing send is something you haven't heard yet. The reason they deleted that message had nothing to do with changing their mind. Your soulmate stared at those words for several minutes because, for once, they had written exactly what they felt without hiding behind careful language. They admitted that last night had forced them to recognize something they could no longer dismiss. Losing the possibility of you frightened them more than finally being honest. Their finger hovered over the screen, ready to send it, when another thought stopped them. What if a message wasn't enough? What if everything they had kept buried deserved a real conversation instead of a few sentences typed in the middle of an emotional night? They deleted the message, but they didn't delete the decision behind it. In fact, that decision became stronger. They promised themselves that the next time they had the opportunity to speak to you, they would stop pretending everything was casual. But there was still one truth they hadn't fully faced, and it was about to become impossible to ignore. As the night grew quieter, your soulmate remembered the exact moment their feelings had changed. It wasn't some dramatic scene. It was something much smaller, a memory of you showing a side of yourself that stayed with them long after the moment ended. They remembered how naturally you made them feel understood, and suddenly they recognized why every attempt to emotionally distance themselves had failed. They weren't simply missing your attention. They were missing you. That difference hit them harder than anything else that night. Stay till the end, because this realization led them to admit something they had resisted for a long time. Part of their confusing behavior came from trying to control feelings that had already become stronger than expected. Every time they pulled back, they thought distance would make things easier. Instead, the silence only made your absence louder. And last night, they finally stopped arguing with what their own heart had been showing them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Your soulmate asked themselves one question. If they had one honest opportunity to tell you everything, what would they say first? The answer came immediately. They wouldn't begin with excuses. They wouldn't blame timing, circumstances, or misunderstandings. They would tell you that something real happened inside them, and they were afraid to admit how much it mattered. Don't skip, because they are now closer than ever to turning that private realization into action. They know there are things you deserve to understand, especially why they became distant at the very moment they wanted to move closer. But one final piece of last night's story remains hidden. Just before they made their decision, they learned something that made them wonder whether you might still feel this connection too, and that unexpected clue is the reason they woke up today more determined than ever to reach you. That unexpected clue came from something your soulmate had almost forgotten, a small moment between you that suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Last night, while replaying everything in their mind, they remembered the way you responded during one particular conversation. At the time, they assumed you were simply being kind, but now they wondered if there had been something deeper beneath your words. A hesitation. A change in your voice. A question you almost asked but never finished. Your soulmate couldn't stop thinking about it because it mirrored exactly what they had been doing themselves, hiding something important behind ordinary conversation. For the first time, they seriously considered that perhaps they weren't the only one afraid of revealing too much. That possibility gave them hope, but it also raised the stakes. If both of you had been waiting for the other person to speak first, how much time had already been lost? By morning, your soulmate wasn't thinking about whether they should tell you anymore. They were thinking about how. They knew a vague message wouldn't explain the nights they questioned themselves, the moments they deliberately held back, or the reason they sometimes seemed distant when they actually wanted to move closer. They wanted you to hear the truth clearly. Their silence was never as simple as it appeared. Something inside them had been changing for longer than they admitted, and last night finally brought that change into focus. They realized that continuing to hide behind uncertainty could create the very ending they feared. Stay with this, because they made a decision before the night was over. The next opportunity they get, they want to stop speaking in hints. No more expecting you to understand feelings they haven't had the courage to explain. No more allowing unanswered questions to grow between you. But there is still one thing making them nervous about that conversation. Your soulmate knows that once they reveal what happened last night, they may also have to admit something about the future, something they weren't prepared to consider until now. They have begun imagining what could happen if you both stopped running from the truth and finally spoke openly about what this connection means. That thought is exciting, but it makes everything suddenly feel real. Don't skip, because their next move may depend on whether they can overcome one final fear, hearing your answer. They can handle telling you how they feel. They can explain why they pulled away. They can even admit they made mistakes. But there is one question they desperately want to ask you, and last night they finally found the courage to put it into words. The question is simple. But your answer could completely change what happens between you next. The question your soulmate finally found the courage to ask is the one they have been avoiding for longer than they want to admit. Is there still something between us worth fighting for? Last night, those words became impossible to silence. They imagined asking you directly, without hiding behind mixed signals or pretending your answer wouldn't matter. And that was when they understood why this conversation feels so urgent. They aren't desperate merely to explain what happened. They need to know whether the connection they still feel has been living quietly inside you too. For so long, they tried to read your silence instead of asking what it meant. They searched for signs, questioned little moments, and sometimes convinced themselves to expect the worst simply because certainty felt frightening. But last night changed that. They realized they would rather hear an honest answer than spend another day trapped inside unanswered questions. And there is something else they want you to know before asking that question. Your soulmate finally recognizes that you shouldn't have been expected to decode their behavior. If they cared, they should have communicated. If they were confused, they should have explained. Instead, fear made them hesitate at moments when honesty could have brought clarity. That realization became one of the hardest truths of last night. Don't skip, because this is where their feelings turned into responsibility. They aren't preparing to come forward expecting you to erase everything that happened before. They want to acknowledge their own choices and finally give you the explanation you never received. Deep down, they know this conversation could lead somewhere beautiful, or it could force them to accept an answer they weren't hoping for. Either way, they have reached the point where truth matters more than hiding. But just when your soulmate thought they understood everything that happened last night, one final memory returned, and it changed the meaning of that unsent message completely. They remembered something you once said that seemed ordinary at the time, but now sounded almost like an invitation for honesty. Suddenly, they wondered whether you had already given them an opportunity to speak and they simply hadn't recognized it. That realization stayed with them into the morning. Something huge is waiting for you, because now they aren't only thinking about confessing what they feel, they're considering whether this could be their chance to repair a moment they accidentally let slip away. And before they finally approach you, there is one last truth they need to admit to themselves, a truth about what they actually want from you if you say there is still a chance. What they actually want is no longer something your soulmate can describe as simple curiosity. Last night forced them to admit that if you say there is still a chance, they don't want to return to the same confusing pattern of silence, distance, and unfinished conversations. They want something clearer. Something honest. They want the opportunity to sit with you and finally say the things they kept editing inside their head before you ever heard them. But there is a deeper reason this matters so much now. Your soulmate realized they weren't afraid of having feelings for you, they were afraid of what those feelings might require from them. Honesty. Vulnerability. Consistency. The courage to stop disappearing emotionally whenever things became real. And once they recognized that, they understood something important. Asking for another chance would mean being prepared to show you a different version of themselves. That realization brought them back to the events of last night. The unexpected conversation, the message they almost sent, the memories they replayed, none of those things created their feelings. They simply removed the excuses your soulmate had been using to avoid them. Stay with this, because there was one particular moment when everything became crystal clear. Your soulmate imagined waking up weeks from now and discovering that you had finally stopped waiting for clarity. The thought didn't make them angry or jealous. It made them realize how much they would regret staying silent when they had the opportunity to speak. Suddenly, the risk of telling you the truth seemed smaller than the risk of never telling you at all. They knew they couldn't control your response, and they shouldn't try. All they could control was whether you finally received the truth directly from them instead of being left to guess. And now that truth is getting harder to contain. Your soulmate wants you to know that last night wasn't simply an emotional moment they will forget by tomorrow. Something shifted in the way they see you, themselves, and everything that has remained unresolved between you. Don't skip, because they are preparing themselves for the possibility that one conversation could change the direction of this connection completely. They want to tell you what they misunderstood. They want to explain why they hesitated. And finally, they want to ask whether the door between you is truly closed, or whether there is still enough space for honesty to enter. But before they can ask you that, there is one final detail from last night they haven't revealed yet. Someone said something about you that your soulmate never expected to hear, and their immediate reaction exposed exactly how deeply they still care. The moment those words about you were spoken, your soulmate reacted before they had time to hide what they felt. Someone casually suggested that maybe you had already moved on emotionally, that perhaps the distance between you meant you were ready to leave the past behind. Your soulmate immediately went quiet. The idea shouldn't have affected them so strongly, but it did. Suddenly, every unfinished conversation between you felt painfully important. They asked how anyone could know what you were feeling without actually hearing it from you, and the question surprised even them. That was when they realized they had been doing exactly the same thing, assuming your feelings instead of asking. Last night exposed that contradiction. They had spent so much time wondering whether you cared while never giving you the complete truth about how much they cared themselves. And in that uncomfortable moment, your soulmate understood that silence had been creating answers neither of you had actually chosen. Afterward, they couldn't forget their own reaction. Why had one simple suggestion about you moving forward shaken them so deeply? The answer became clearer as the night continued. Your soulmate wasn't afraid of you finding happiness. They were afraid of discovering that they had waited until it was too late to tell you what was real. That distinction mattered. Stay till the end, because this was the moment they stopped treating their feelings like something that would simply disappear with enough time. They realized that if they wanted clarity, they had to become brave enough to offer clarity first. No pressure. No dramatic promises. Just an honest conversation where neither of you would have to guess anymore. They began mentally rehearsing what they wanted to tell you, but every version kept returning to the same confession. I should have told you sooner. And behind those words was an even bigger truth they had never allowed themselves to say. That bigger truth is why they are so desperate to speak now. Your soulmate finally admitted that what they want isn't simply another conversation with you. They want to know whether something meaningful can still be built from everything that remained unfinished. They know that answer belongs to both of you, not just them. They also know they cannot erase the hesitation, confusion, or missed opportunities that came before. But last night taught them that continuing the same pattern guarantees nothing will change. Don't skip, because they are approaching the moment when words have to become action. The message they deleted may return in a different form. The question they were afraid to ask may finally be spoken. And the feelings they kept carefully hidden may finally become impossible to disguise. But there is still one detail they haven't told anyone. Before going to sleep last night, your soulmate made a quiet promise about the next time they have a real chance to reach you, and that promise could change everything.